Hello, thank you for tuning in to Lessons of Vietnam. My name is Bill Dixon. I am president of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, and I'd also like to introduce you to my co-host, Mr. Bob Matthews, who is an award-winning educator who put together a course called The Lessons of Vietnam, which is now nationwide. Bob, I want to turn it over to you and let them tell them a little bit about your course and what you've done and so forth, and what NCVI, North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, has done across the nation with your course.
Thank you, Bill. Well, first of all, again, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. And the Lessons of Vietnam is a labor of love. It's a course that was put together almost 20 years ago by myself and several Vietnam veterans in Wake County to reach out to the social studies curriculum that was void of any Vietnam education. We looked in the textbooks. We found that most of the students were graduating with zero knowledge on the Vietnam experience, a part of history that may change all of our worlds. 7 letters that may have changed the world. I met men like Bill Dixon, Joe Harsh, and men in the NCVVI that were willing to not only speak in the classrooms throughout Wake County schools, were also able and willing to travel with me nationwide to teacher conventions, to VVA conventions, and to implant or insert the Lessons of Vietnam into a school system as they needed it.
Well, Bob, going on is just want to tell people I'll start with, we don't propose to be experts on Vietnam. As those of you who experienced Vietnam, you know that you only knew basically what you were and what you were doing that day. You very seldom got to see the big picture. I was in Vietnam in 1967. I was with the 20th Engineer Brigade, 159 Engineer Group. I was stationed at Long Binh, 22 miles north of Saigon. And as a private, when I got to Vietnam, all I knew was basically what they told me and what I was doing today. It's almost like you see the mule with the blinders on it. You only know what you're doing. But since we've been back and met people like Bob, we've all done a lot of research and reading and so forth. Again, we don't propose to be experts, but we do have facts and opinions and have done a lot of research. We've been back to Vietnam several times. And Bob, you started this course at Enloe High School.
Yes.
With some little bit of trouble getting it started, but once it got going, your first couple of classes of students were just outstanding, and we've had some great teachers come on after that. Can you share a little bit about
Certainly. I think the first thing when you do a course that's new, like Lessons of Vietnam, like any school system, like Wake County schools, they require the creators of the course to show the mettle of the course, show the textbook, show the objectives, show why you're teaching it, what you're going to teach, basically the 5 W's of teaching in social studies. So if you show why the course should be taught, they will then give you an opportunity to teach the course. Being at Enloe High School, the magnet school in Raleigh, they allowed me to insert in my course, the American Foreign Policy, a model or a pilot, if you will, a pilot course for 6 weeks on Vietnam. So we approached the students with a survey. I approached the local veterans, how we wanted to do this. And as Bill mentioned earlier, most of the veterans are not teachers. I'm very fortunate. I have the privilege of being a Vietnam veteran and a social studies teacher. So we were walking on thin ice because most of you remember the Vietnam story was not well received in America. Most Vietnam veterans didn't want to talk about it. Most high school books avoided it. Most high school seniors graduated with infinitesimal knowledge of Vietnam. So we went to the wall in D.C., and we noticed 58,000 people there on the wall, and their story was not being told. So the pilot course at Enloe High School, with the help of the veterans and their families, and the enthusiastic students, was a great success. It went from one course at Enloe High School in 1993 to 750 schools as we sit here today and speak. It has been a nationwide effort, and there's no way we can thank the many people that have helped us.
That's true, Bob. We've had a lot of help as we've traveled all over the country. We've even took the course to a certain extent over to Vietnam, and that's another story about. We started the Bridgeback Foundation, which is part of the North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated. It's kind of our educational, humanitarian part of our organization. You were in Vietnam in what years?
I was in Vietnam 1967 and 68, and I was there, as Bill mentioned, as a rookie. As most of us went to Vietnam, we went alone, and we served alone, and came home alone. And when we came back to America, most of us knew only where we served and what we did when we were there. I think the past few years, one of the great stories of this course is the Vietnam veterans themselves and their families have learned so much more about what they did, and it's meant more to them as they have helped develop this course and answer questions from throughout the nation, from Seattle to Florida, from Pittsburgh to Texas. We have spread the course. Wherever people want to know about Vietnam, we are willing to answer the questions, do the research, and help them learn more and more about that word called Vietnam.
Thank you, Bob. Vietnam is a country. It's a war. It's changed quite a bit. We talk to veterans all the time who say, "I'd never go back," and I can appreciate that. Bob, you've been back 4 times?
Yes, I have.
4 times, and we're going back again this next year in, let's see, May, I believe, of next year, and put in another playground. We've already put in one. And I understand veterans who say they don't want to go back. When I came home from Vietnam, I didn't tell anybody I was a Vietnam veteran because of the protests were going on. Back then they were protesting the soldier and not the war. Basically, we were told when we got off the plane, take your uniform off, don't travel as military. We were called baby killers. Anything that happened, it was a Vietnam veteran on drugs and so forth. So for a long, long time, we couldn't talk about being a Vietnam veteran. And today, I think our Lessons of Vietnam course and what we've done has been a healing process for a lot of the Vietnam veterans who have come back, who have now go into schools and talk to the kids who are fantastic. All the classes we've talked to have always been fantastic kids, and it's been a real healing process for a lot of the veterans. I see veterans every day that come now coming down with post-traumatic stress. Now that we've got a name for it, and tell us a little bit about, let's see, you and I were kind of unusual. We were married when we went to Vietnam, not to each other, of course, I didn't know you. But Bob's from the North, and if you probably hadn't figured it out yet, because I don't have an accent, I'm from the South. People in the South don't have accents, just people from the North, which is kind of funny because I figured when I got to Vietnam, I could tell who the good guys and bad guys because the people from the North always talk funny. But then I realized I didn't understand the language. Everybody sounded funny. But let's see, you were at Pleiku?
I was stationed Pleiku in a place called Nha Trang. And one of the misconceptions, you might say, of the education of Vietnam is that there was a misconception. I guess one of the lessons of Vietnam was that people didn't want to hear about it. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Because when I came back to Pennsylvania to teach school, Vietnam was very popular. In fact, when we went to Vietnam, it was a very popular move in our foreign policy. We were told to draw a line in the sand in Vietnam. That was going to be where we confronted communism. We were going to stop communism in Southeast Asia. They were not going to take Cambodia. They were not going to take Laos. They were not going to take Indonesia. They were not going to take Micronesia. They were not going to take Australia. We were drawing a line in the sand in Vietnam. The Cold War would end here. Little did we know 40-some years later, they were correct. For all practical purposes, communism is on its last legs, if not dead already. And what happened in Vietnam, many veterans, as Bill mentioned, didn't want to talk about a thing until they got a little bit older. They looked back with a perspective and saw what they did, what they accomplished, and how they changed the world. They are my heroes, always have been. And one thing I'd like to mention about the lessons of Vietnam is a misconception or a myth about Vietnam was that people didn't want to hear about it. People can't get enough about Vietnam. It's one of the most interesting topics I've ever taught. It's one of the hardest topics to teach because it's such a complex issue. And when you draw upon veterans like Bill Dixon and Joe Harsh from all walks of the world that come to Cary, Raleigh, North Carolina, into Wake County schools, it's like a living library. The veterans are a primary source that our schools didn't tap. And now they're starting to tap the veterans as a primary source, first-person history. Let them come into the classroom and tell the students what really happened.
We'd like to put out an invitation to you. If you have any questions or comments, give us a call at 919-518-9773. Again, 919-518-9773. You know, a lot of the veterans came back, as I said, and couldn't and didn't want to talk about it and so forth, and understand that sort of thing, because, like I said, it was we came back, and if anything bad happened, it was a Vietnam vet and so forth. As going over back to Vietnam, as we have done recently to help out an orphanage over there and some of the kids over there, we found that most of the people in Vietnam now don't know anything about the war. It's just another war because they've had so many and so forth. But the average age is probably 37. The kids were all in tune into Facebook and different kinds of media that way. They know the Western culture quite a bit. And as the older communists are kind of dying out, as there's more and more freedom they're finding over there, Saigon, or some people like to call it Ho Chi Minh City, but we call it Saigon. It's always going to be Saigon. And if you're in Saigon, it's called Saigon. Today, probably the most dangerous thing about Vietnam is crossing the streets of Saigon. It's quite an experience in itself. I drove all over Saigon when I was there in 67, 68. I was there for a little thing called Tet, which is something we'll discuss later on. But there's no way I'd get behind the wheel of a vehicle over there now. It's they have road signs, which are suggestions. Nobody seems to follow them and so forth. You'd be going down the road, people passing on the right, going both directions. People pass you on the left, going to both directions. And the light changes, so what? Who's got most nerve? Goes on. And those lines down the road, I'm not quite certain what they're there for. Suggestions.
Just suggestions.
Luckily, they don't have road rage. If they did, half the population would be dead in one day with the traffic over there. But it's really a beautiful country today, and they love the Americans over there. Free enterprise system in the South is doing well. It's a great place to visit. It is still a communist country, and the thing about being a Vietnam veteran today, depending where you were, South Vietnam in itself is divided up in basically three areas. You had the mountain range, you had the Piedmont range, and then you had the Delta, which was swamp. And the weather can be quite a bit different than the others. When we were back over this past year putting in a playground for that orphanage over there, a lot of the guys went with us, wore jackets the whole time because we were in the edge of the mountains, and it got down kind of chilly. I remember when I was over there in 67, 68, it got down to 65 one time. I thought I was going to freeze to death. But then, so you've got the Piedmont, which is kind of flat, and then you've got the Delta, which is swamp. Lots of leeches and mosquitoes and that sort of stuff. And then you got the mountains. Some of the mountains are probably 8,000 feet high. And Bob, you went back and you went to see one of your trips. You saw some of the Montagnards and stayed in some of their places. And tell them a little bit about who the Montagnards are. And
I went back to Vietnam for several times for several reasons. And one is, as we started to put this course together, I didn't have all the answers. And one of the worst things you can be is a teacher with not the answers. You can't keep saying, I don't know. So I had to go back to Vietnam to find out some answers. And as I went back, I learned more and more and more about the war. And I came home with answers. And I could, with the help of my brothers, Vietnam veterans, write the course. One of the trips I went into the mountains of Pleiku, where I served, with this group called the Montagnards, the mountain people of Vietnam. And they're akin to our history, like the American Indian. There were so many dialects and tribes among them. In some cases, they were their own worst enemies. But they were survivalists. They were our best friends They loved Americans. They fought beside us. And ironically, years later, the largest population of Montagnards is in North Carolina, in Greensboro. But as I went back one time, then I went back the next time and took teachers. And each time, of course, it became very obvious what Vietnam veterans were becoming. They weren't just a Vietnam veteran that served in Vietnam. They didn't have survivor guilt. They had survivor responsibility. They became caretakers of a curriculum. They became the generation of men and women and their families who are going to explain to this generation of American students what happened in Vietnam, why we did it, where it was, when it happened, and the result. And as each year as we do this and develop more and more and more, the questions get better. Veterans, as Bill said, come in to speak to the class. They're very therapeutic for them. They're telling their story as no one can. They're talking about why people protested. They're talking about why people volunteered to go to Vietnam. They're talking about how it affected their lives. I was married in Vietnam. I was a high school graduate. I was a teacher. I was very privileged to serve my country, come back and teach. But as Bill mentioned before, we all came back from Vietnam with the job not completely done. We felt we cheated the South Vietnamese people. We went there to give them a better life. We went to Vietnam to give South Vietnam freedom. We didn't quite accomplish it in the 60s. We think we will do it in the 90s. But most of us came back with a little bit of guilt feeling that we should have done more, we should have stayed longer, and we're attempting to right that wrong today. Through education, through our students and their students. That's what the Bridge Back is all about.
You know, as we go through this show, we're going to try to do several. And one of the things we're going to end up doing, Bob, is we're going to bring in all aspects, such as we'll probably have some war protesters come in because they were a very important part of what was going on. You know, everything we do today basically is based on the 60s to a certain extent. Our clothes we wear, the music we listen to. It was a very important time in this country. You had civil rights going on. You had war protesters going on. You had women's movement going on. You had a little bit of just about everything going on with the war protesters and so forth. And the ones you had a choice, as you always say. You could run, or you could go ahead and go into service, or you could run to another country or whatever. And as we go through this process, we invite you to give us questions or comments that you like. If you're a Vietnam veteran, tell us about your story. If you're interested in interested in Vietnam and the war and so forth, give us a call again at 919-518-9773 and give us your question or give us your comment. Like I said before, we don't propose to be experts. We have done a lot of research. We were there. We with the leeches and the mosquitoes and the snakes and the heat and so forth. And all I knew about where I went was where the lieutenant or whoever it was told me to go. I didn't read Vietnamese, so half the time I didn't know where I was going. Out in the jungles, there were no signs anyway. But Bob, you said you were at Pleiku and you were married about 3 years when you went, I believe.
I was married my senior year in college, drafted that summer. And when I went to Vietnam, you found everybody there. I mean, you found the single guys, you found the poor guy, the rich guy, and there were so many stereotypes set out about Vietnam. People thought first it was a poor man's war, poor black kids, poor white kids. Not true. The only color in Vietnam was green. That was your uniform. And part of this show, we'd like to offer you, the listeners and the watchers, like we do the students, that no question is off limits. Anything is fair game. See, once you cultivate the question and answer process and you give people a comfort zone, they can ask anything. We can talk about Henry Kissinger, the great statesman, talk about Jane Fonda. We can talk about Lyndon Johnson, William Calley, We can go on and on with the personalities because Vietnam was a 10-year period in history from 1965 to 75 that changed the world. And the Vietnam Wall in D.C., one of our favorite places. Most vets you know have somebody on the wall and they pay homage to they had no tomorrows. Our job is to tell their story. 58,372 people on the wall paid a price for freedom, and we're paying it today. So when you're asked to serve your country, you can run, you can hide, or you can serve. We chose to serve. Being married in Vietnam was very difficult. I think sometimes the people at home have it more difficult than the soldiers, because the people serving in Vietnam, everything was right in front of them. The people at home, everything was in their imagination. It was harder on them. But I think because of Vietnam, I'm a better teacher, a better husband, a better father, and a better grandfather. And I think I will tell the Vietnam story as long as people want to hear it. We will take all questions and comments dealing with this subject.
Well, you know that, Bob, they say we had 10 years experience 1 year at a time.
Yes.
Depending on where you were, what year you're in Vietnam, every Vietnam veteran story is different. I think one of the things that most Vietnam veterans relate to are the smells of Vietnam back in our day. They were quite unique with the humidity and so forth, and unbelievably now most of those smells are gone. For those of you Vietnam veterans, you go back now, you very seldom see a lambretta. A lambretta is a motorcycle with a cab on the back that holds 14 Vietnamese or 2 Americans. That was the main part of transportation when we were there. We dedicate this show and this entire format to all the men and women who served in Vietnam, those who we lost and are on the wall, those who are still missing. North Carolina has 41 still missing who are unaccounted for, different states. North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated has met for the last 27 years, the first Saturday every month, at the state capitol. The memorial there is called the Last Fire Base. It's one of the most unique, fantastic memorials of the Vietnam War that you'll ever see. Designed and sculptured by a woman out of Greensboro, Abby Godwin. We meet there and call out the names of the 41 from North Carolina who are still missing. We have different organizations come in on a regular basis and participate by calling the names. We will continue meeting and calling out those names until all are accounted for. We started out 27 years ago basically with 65 names. And our kids have also said they would take over when we get too old with our walkers to get up there. But the important part is to remember the families, and we have met some of the families of some of the unaccounted for, and they still have that little bit of hope after all these years that their loved one will come home, or at best at least bring their remains home. Bob, you had something?
In fact, I was asked that same question last time we spoke in North Davidson High School. One of the students came up and said, "Mr. Masters, do you think anyone's still left in Vietnam?" I've always believed yes. I've always believed we had left men behind. I believe to this day we have JPAC now hunting for remains. As Bill mentioned, we've been to a few of the funerals of the remains were sent home. We have 41 names of men still missing in North Carolina. Every state has this. But as we go through this and as we talk to people about Vietnam, one of the hardest things to do is take them with you on a trip to Vietnam. Because many people in the 60s didn't serve, but they experienced Vietnam. So one analogy we try to use is take a calendar of a full year. In my case, it was 1967. You take every day of that year, all the birthdays, Christmas, Easter, summer break, all the highlights of the year, and just erase it. The Vietnam veterans that served their tour of duty missed every single thing in a calendar year. Then when they came back, they had to adjust to that immediately. There was no transition period like there is today for our young veterans, and I'm so glad they have that. Our young men and women coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan have a little bit of a, I guess we'll call it counseling, cooling down period, where they can readjust to civilian life. For many Vietnam veterans, it was very difficult. They might have been in Cam Ranh Bay like I was on Sunday, in Seattle on Monday, in Pittsburgh on Tuesday. And all of a sudden you're back from Vietnam, and everybody you know did not go to Vietnam. So you're like a fish in a fishbowl. It's so hard to explain to someone about Vietnam. And when I first started to teach school, I noticed that people wanted to ask questions, but didn't know how. That was the germ for this Lessons of Vietnam. The show is designed to help America understand Vietnam, to put Vietnam in its proper place in history. Its importance or lack of it will be up to you. But one thing I've always treasured is people that serve their country, like my friends that are veterans. They served their country in the 60s. They're serving their country now, going around teaching in schools, helping out in communities. Vietnam will probably always be the most misunderstood war in our history. There's never been a war like it, and probably never will be. And our job is to make sense of it if we can, and we're trying.
You know, Bob, it was the first what we call the television war.
Yes.
Little bits and pieces, never a full story. A little second here, a little second there. Everybody would come home and have dinner, be sitting around the dinner table, and they'd show you a little something here and a little something there, and again, what was all going on and so forth. I only spent a year in Vietnam. I can't believe I just said only. My wife told me that if I got killed in Vietnam, she'd kill me. So my job was to survive 364 days and come home, which I did. And again, depending on where you were and what you did, I was at Long Binh, which is the largest military installation in the world at the time. We call it, and right out from where I was, we had the LBJ, Long Binh Jail, were guys who did bad things. You know, one of the things, the Lessons of Vietnam came out was, when we were there, the people who were protesting the war protested us.
Yes.
And there's one thing that we've been able to do, and since we came back, is get across to people, if you don't support the war, that's fine, but support the warrior. And luckily, seems to be most of the young men and women today serving do get that support and so forth. You've talked about before, when you see a veteran in an airport or a restaurant or whatever, to show them, tell them what they can do to show their support and so forth.
See, we are big benefactors of dissent. As Bill mentioned, protest and dissent is the backbone of America. We like people to complain about things. That's how you make things better. But we worked and worked and worked and said, as Bill mentioned, you may protest and demonstrate against the war. That's healthy, not the warrior. The warrior is a young man and woman who leave their country and go to a foreign land and serve America for make the world a better place. Today, when you see a soldier in uniform, you want to go up and thank them. You don't have to touch them. It's called a double chest tap. You simply go like this, above your heart, 2 taps, boom, boom. They look at you, your eyes meet, and simply says, thank you for serving. They may walk over, you may engage in a conversation. We were on one of our trips in Chicago, and I was getting a bite to eat in the airport. This man walked over, and we always wear our Vietnam hats, like the one I'm wearing now. Walked over, and he was in uniform. We started talking about his Afghanistan tour, my Vietnam tour, and he says, sir, may I buy you dinner? And I said, well, you don't have to. He said, no, I want to. His dad was a Vietnam veteran. And he lived through what Bill mentioned earlier, the silence for years of the veterans. Now just put yourself in that position. How lonely you would be. You come home from serving in a foreign land, and no one other than your immediate family wanted to hear about it. All of a sudden, they call me the Vietnam guy. This course opens at Wake County Schools, and I get a phone call. Can I come in and speak in your class? Yes, you can. I don't know if I can answer questions. I said, give the kids a chance. They get a raw deal. The kids want to know things today. All of our classes now are 90 minutes, block scheduling. Perfect for Lessons of Vietnam. When you walk in and say, we have some great teachers that prep the students, they ask questions for 90 minutes. Those men and women and speak in the classes we arranged. They leave that day with a skip in their step. Someone cares. And that's the privilege of teaching school and the honor of being one of the people that wrote this course. We feel we've changed some lives for the better, and we continue to do this with the Bridge Back, our foundation that is making the world, we hope, a place where we understand conflict, where it's worth the sacrifice to make the world a better place. It's worth the conversation. It's worth the inconvenience. It's worth going to D.C. It's worth rubbing a name. It's worth sending a donation. This country's worth a lot of things, and the Vietnam veterans is one group that has been so strong in this, supporting the Iraqi, Afghan vets, and all of our vets. We're all brothers in this together. We always will be.
Bob, you talked.
I have a question.
Okay.
I didn't serve here.
Yeah.
What percentage of the guys that went to Vietnam were drafted?
I don't have statistics.
I mean,
with me.
that went, maybe, I wouldn't say against their will, but
Yeah.
they wouldn't
It was,
volunteer.
yeah.
They were. What do you think?
It was. I have the statistics, but don't have them with me.
Roughly.
I would say less than a third.
Okay. How did it come to be that the American was protesting the soldier? They didn't know who said, yeah, I want to go over there and do this, versus I don't want to go, but I have to. How can you protest somebody who the country sent there against their will?
Well, because
How did it happen?
you had soldiers coming back who were making statements that were not necessarily true. The people who wanted to protest and did not know how to protest the government, we represented the government. So that's what they did. They represented, we represented the government to them, so they protested us because they didn't know how to get to the government. How do you protest an entity that you really just, it's an all-encompassing, the government, and you can't protest. They were not learning how to protest them as much as we were. We were the symbol of the government and the corruption and all the things that were supposed to be going on. One of the things I'll be covering is the myths of Vietnam. There's probably more myths of Vietnam than any war you've ever gone through. Different myths, the baby killer stuff. If you see some of the movies, it's like all we did was rape and kill and pillage and that sort of stuff, and that's not the way it was. So that was, as people were coming back, they were frustrated. A lot of the war protesters after the draft was done away with. Originally there was the draft, which is what I went in through. Then they went to the lottery. A lot of the protesters kind of dropped out after the lottery came in because there was not as much. So it kind of gets you the idea it wasn't the war they were protesting, they just were protesting them going to the war. Was the difference.
I can speak to that briefly because I was drafted. And a lot of guys did volunteer for Vietnam, surprisingly. Probably about 25% of the men in Vietnam were drafted. The other were volunteers, or they were either career soldiers that rotated to Vietnam. And sometimes when the protests were fed by the media, they were fed by all kinds of things, but they weren't protesting the soldiers. They were protesting why we're in Vietnam. Why do we in this foreign country? And they didn't have the information. Our foreign policy had always been, where it was Korea, Eastern Europe, Cuba, we always fought communism. Wherever communism tried to take over a part of the country, we reacted. We called it containment. And we went to Vietnam to contain communism. As Bill mentioned, when the draft ended and the lottery came in, the protests stopped quite a bit. And men came home. A lot of Vietnam veterans marched against the war when they came home. Now, they weren't against the soldiers. They were against the philosophy of the war, not telling the truth. A lot of problems in Vietnam, a lot of corruption, a lot of scandal. And like we've always said, tell the people the truth. Let it settle down. But they did protest quite a bit. But I never thought it was against me. I never thought it was against a draftee. I always thought it was against why we were there.
One of the things about it, you see soldiers going off today. You see them and an entire unit going off. And you see them already in their uniform. They've got weapons. They've got their helmets and everything else. We went to Vietnam. The most lonely time I ever had was, you mentioned a while ago about being lonely. I got on an airplane with about 250 men that I had no idea who they were or where they were going. I'm going to a war that I know nothing about, to a country I didn't even know where it was. When I tried to look up Vietnam in the atlas, it was called French Indochina. So I had no idea where I was going, but I had to get on an airplane with these men who I did not know, had never seen before, never trained with before, and get on that airplane, which was one of my first flights. It was my first flight there to fly into Vietnam, and it's a long flight to fly, and got off. And when that plane door opened and the heat and humidity opened up, I'm going, this ain't North Carolina, with the smells and so forth. And that's a really a lonely, frightening opportunity. I guess you'd call it an opportunity or a predicament to get off that plane and see the guys with weapons and so forth. And they don't tell you a whole lot when you first get there until you're assigned a unit. You don't have weapons or a whole lot. So that's a tough time to be going over there. Where today they go as a unit, and I think that's one of the lessons they've learned in Vietnam is. You have much better soldiers when you train together. You know what each other would do, because as a new man in Vietnam, they didn't exactly welcome you there, because there's a good chance you may get killed before they got to know you, and then if they got to know you and you got killed, it's kind of hard on you. So you guys really had it kind of tough when they got to Vietnam quite often until they were there for a while.
Most of the guys in Vietnam, the newbies, as you mentioned, realize that history is a series of analogies. And as Bill mentioned, the soldiers today, God bless them, they go in together, they enlist together, they train together, it's like a team, almost like an athletic team. They compete together, they deploy together, they serve together, they return together, they're friends for life. Now in Vietnam, there was an old expression. It was, we all miss Christmas. We all did. And you know, Christmas to most Americans is the best time of the year. And when you miss Christmas, you cannot get it back. I have tried to get that 1967 Christmas back for 40 years. I can't get it back. I keep looking for it. But when I got to Vietnam, what you do is you make what are called fast friends. You're in a country, you don't know anyone. And pretty soon you know everyone. And Vietnam veterans, when they say, how long ago was Vietnam for you? If they close their eyes, it was yesterday. Vietnam is like a river. It runs through you. It's part of your life, all of your life. Vietnam veterans understand this. It's become part of them. Many Vietnam veterans are successful today in their careers, in their marriages, in their entire life because of Vietnam. Now, we know there's a lot of men that have died by Vietnam. A lot come back with problems, but a lot didn't. And some of the myths of Vietnam we'll uncover in this show is to answer all of your questions, of course, but show you that many, many pluses of the Vietnam experience have made this country a much better place.
You know, I think Vietnam is created a larger amount of college graduates because by keeping that student deferment, it bought you some time, hopefully, till the war was over with. So a lot of people went to college who normally wouldn't go to college because they wanted that deferment, so they wouldn't go to Vietnam.
Good point.
And, you know, some of the myths of Vietnam was that we were the most uneducated and so forth, but history has proven that we were some of the best educated soldiers of any war. People have come back and been very, very successful with their going on with their lives, kind of putting Vietnam to a certain extent away. It still lingers there. I talked to a man this weekend who spent 28 years in the military and was a Vietnam veteran, and he just now started having post-traumatic stress problems and so forth. Has been trying to get help from that. So it's lingered. It lingers on. As you said, it never quite goes away. You can leave Vietnam, but you never really leave Vietnam. You can leave the country, but it never really leaves you. Like you said, it was a river. We'll be talking about the different myths and so forth. And if you have any questions or comments, as I mentioned a couple times before, give us a call at 919-518-9773. We welcome your input and questions. Without questions, you're just going to have to listen to Bob and I ramble on a little bit. We'd like to have your input. That's how you learn. We want to make sure that we cover what you want to find out about Vietnam as a country and as a war. And Bob, we are going back again next May. You've been back several times. Talk a little bit about the changes in the country that you've seen just from the times you've been back.
Well, the biggest change I've seen is the education of the Vietnamese students. Almost all the students take English. They speak English. I had the privilege of teaching a class in Vietnam, and when I walked into the classroom, there was probably 40 students there, all in shirt and tie, all stood up at attention. Said, "Mr. Matthews, we've been waiting for you." I'm used to that in Wake County School, sure I am. So, anyway, they speak fluent English. They ask great questions. We have a little quiz for them. We work with the McDonald's Corporation and many of the people in Wake County. We took souvenirs over to them. And the country has come aboard where they want American ingenuity in Vietnam. They want communism to go back where it came from, and so do we. They love baseball, which we taught them a baseball clinic in Vietnam. But the country has become so, I guess you'd say, ingenious. These people are so good with anything because they never had anything. It reminds me of America hundreds of years ago when the immigration came in and we made this country what it was. They're doing the same thing. They're going through the same metamorphosis as we did. In a few years, Vietnam will be a player in the world. It is now economically. It'll be more and more and more. But the youth of America and the youth of Vietnam are on the bridge. The bridge back is wide open, and we're going back in May to put in a second playground for the students there in Dong Ha. And we will have pictures later in the show of what we've already done in Vietnam. Some of the proof where Americans are going back every day, especially Vietnam veterans. They get in their 50s and their 60s. They have their bucket list. And they say, what do I want to do? And they always come up with, I'd like to go back to Nam. You see one Vietnam vet, the greeting is always the same. Welcome home. It's not 40 years too late. It's fine. It's right on time. If you say to me, welcome home tomorrow, I say thank you. I know you didn't say it 50 years ago. That's okay. I'll take it today.
Well, Bob, you and I and another member of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans, Joe Harsh, we went up to Fairfax, Virginia last weekend before last, and we met a guy that's got to be our friends, a song. He was when the Marines landed at Red Beach. He was a high school student standing there holding a sign up, "Welcome, United States Marines." Later, he grew up and was a member of the South Vietnamese Air Force. When Saigon, of course, fell, he was put in a re-education camp for some time. Today, he runs a quite successful guide service there in Vietnam. Being a former South Vietnamese soldier is unusual. He owns his own home, has a car of his own. Two of his oldest sons have gone off to university and have gone back. But he has started a program that I think is very, very special. We went back in 2009, my first trip back. One of the things we did was we actually spent the night with two former VC, Vietnamese communists, at their house. That was quite an experience. When we first got there, the man never got out of his pajamas. I mean, sleeping pajamas, not his black pajamas or whatever. And he showed us where he'd gotten shot by a helicopter during the war. And one of the guys with us was a former helicopter pilot, and his entire crew were with him. So we always kind of wondered if he was one of them. But visiting with this former VC and his wife, we sit around probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning drinking his moonshine and talking and so forth. And it went over so well that Song is now putting together a program. In fact, he is this week, I believe, at a VA hospital talking to veterans with post-traumatic stress about taking them back to Vietnam and going to the VC's house and spending a couple of days with that former VC. And that got to be, I know it was an experience for us.
Unbelievable.
And so that's that was one of the things that Song is working on today is helping soldiers come to grips with the post-traumatic stress and so forth. And hopefully when we go back over again, Song is going to be our guide. We've already requested him when we go back next year because we've gotten to be real good friends with him. He's a grandpa now. And
Yep. There's one thing we wanted to mention to the audience also is there's such a interest in Vietnam veterans learning more and more about going back to Vietnam with their buddies, reuniting, going back to where they served. And we offer this service. We have a very good group that we do this with. We've been back several times. And the one group we took back, the first bridge back trip, 12 Vietnam veterans went back. And your first trip back to Vietnam is very, very traumatic because there's no bullets, there's cameras, of course. The Vietnamese welcome you with open arms because we are finishing what we started in the 60s. And most Vietnam veterans want to repay this debt to America and to Vietnam. And as we do this, as this show progresses, many of your questions will be answered. Many of the movies you've seen on Vietnam will be put in the right perspective. Many of the books you have read will be analyzed. We've read most of the books. Many of the addresses and places you're going around the country. Almost every state has a monument or a series of monuments. We are privy to this database. We'll be giving you all this information. So as you travel across the country, you can visit these places and pay your respects. Because Vietnam, as I said earlier in the show, changed the world. We're just realizing now how much.
there's a lot of movies out there, and some of them are a whole lot better than the other. Bob and I are unfortunate enough, I guess, in one way, we were asked to attend the premiere of one of the worst movies I think I have ever seen, period, let alone a Vietnam veteran movie. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details, but it was probably the worst thing I've ever seen. But watching the movies, there's so many cliches rolled in, but there's some good movies in different parts. The movies out there, there's some excellent books. And as you go through your day, you'll find there's a lot of wannabes. You've got people who are experts on Vietnam who never set foot in Vietnam. They can rattle off the history of Vietnam. Quite often, though, you'll see them. They may have the recent one that comes to mind. He started out as a Navy man, then he was a Navy SEAL, and then he became a Marine, and then from that he became a Special Forces. He was in all branches of services. He was in the Air Force. He was one of the special guys in the Air Force. He served in Vietnam according to his bio in 1978. Which I think is a little strange since we left in 73 or so.
Yeah.
But you have a lot of wannabes out there, and they could have taken my place. If they come up and said, hey, I want to go, you stay back, I'd have said, yes, sir, let me get out of your way, because I didn't go by choice. But I'm glad, to a certain extent, I'm glad I did one. But as you go through life and you talk to people, and that creates some of the myths that you are talking about Vietnam, because I went into a class one time to give an example, and the first question the kids asked me was, how many did you skin and eat when you were in Vietnam? And I'm going, what are you talking about? And they told me that someone had gone into class before and talked about skinning and eating the Vietnamese people over there, and the guy couldn't find Vietnam on the map, let alone being a Vietnam veteran. There's been people who made their entire lifetime teaching about Vietnam who never saw Vietnam, who became experts. As we mentioned a while ago, you only saw in Vietnam where you were and basically what you were doing. You never got a chance to see the big picture. But these guys have come back and read the books and studied and saw the big picture, and they are got to be experts of Vietnam and never got there.
Well, in the internet computer age, as we maybe criticize sometimes, I'm going to compliment it now. You have at your fingertips the world. As Bill mentioned some books. One book I'd like to recommend is Stolen Valor by Mr. Burdick. Now, what he does is he exposes these wannabes, goes back, and one of the most famous was a great actor, one of my favorite actors, was Brian Dennehy, who for years portrayed himself as a Vietnam veteran. And one night on the Letterman show, he came clean. And he said, I'm sorry, I lied about it. It was the thing to do. It was in to be a Vietnam veteran. It was kind of fashionable. And so they lied. And people went on to approach someone. Well, we do. I've found people that I've taught school with in Wake County schools in Pennsylvania that taught the students, our precious students, and lied to them about Vietnam. And I've confronted them. I said, why are you doing this? You're way out of bounds. It's very delicate when you do this, but it's something you have to do as a concerned citizen. You can't lie to students. When we started this course called Lessons of Vietnam, one thing we did, and we still do to this day, is we screened the veterans. We talked to them. Where were you in Nam? What did you do? These are things you should tell the kids, answer all the questions, answer the parents' questions. These are things you don't tell them. Most of the vets listen. We've had a great rapport with the schools throughout the country. And so Lessons of Vietnam is just getting started. I know it sounds funny to say that. We're just getting started. We've been doing it 15 years. From one class to 700. We might stop at 1,000. We might not.
Well, you know, some of these Vietnam vets are getting old. I've noticed when I go out there in different places and meet with other vets, some of them are getting old. It's hard to believe. We're now starting the 50th anniversary of the war in Vietnam. The government is starting to have a commemoration of the 50th year of Vietnam, and it's amazing how old some of the veterans are getting. You know, you and I haven't changed anything whatsoever since we started. You know, there's so many things to cover. We're going to continue this show on from different times, and like I said, we'd love to have your comments and text us in with your questions or whatever. We feel very fortunate to be able to have this format here. We were talking about wannabes. I think there in the whole Vietnam period, there was like 600 or 800 Navy SEALs that served in Vietnam. Of that 600 or 800, 1,200 of them live right here in this area. That'll kind of give you an idea. There are more Navy SEALs around here. It's just, I don't know. I guess that's because they're supposed to be one of the best. But
got a good story,
Special Forces. But I forgot how many people signed on the census last time. It was like 4 or 5 million people said they were Vietnam vets, as opposed to like 2 or 3 that actually served. Bob, you had something?
Remember, one guy came up and he said to me, "You're the Vietnam guy." I said, "Yeah, one of the Vietnam guys. I'm the teacher." He said, "Yeah, I want to come in and speak in your class." I said, "Good." I said, "Where'd you serve in Vietnam?" He goes, "Oh man, I served. I can't talk about it. It's all my duties blacklisted, black ops. No one knows anything." I said, "Did you ever serve in a place called Chu Hoi?" He went, "Oh man, Chu Hoi was unbelievable." I called him aside and said, "Come here. Chu Hoi is not even a place. Chu Hoi was a program of dropping leaflets out of helicopters to get North Vietnamese to defect to the South. You are an absolute liar. You should not be allowed in the classroom, so go home." And we've learned after a while how to spot a wannabe. They're usually brag about what they did. All they want to talk about is who they killed and how many. When you talk to a Vietnam veteran, have a little time on your hands. Ask them where they served, what they did, when they were there. That's the key to the whole thing. How old they were, where they're from. You've got them then in a capsule. They come in, they share their life with the students. It becomes a great story. A big part of history is now coming full circle. The Vietnam veteran is now becoming what they always were. Patriots and soldiers that fought for freedom for this nation.
A good way to get the conversation started, of course, would be to welcome home, appreciate your service, and what year were you in Vietnam, and where were you? That alone keep you in a conversation for a couple of hours,
Sure.
probably, because as I mentioned before, and Bob has mentioned, where you were and what year you were there, it was totally different. I mentioned Joe Harsh several times. He was at Long Binh 2 years, almost 3 years after I left there, and it was like 2 different worlds. Long Binh had 55,000 troops when I was there, and but everybody, if they will talk to you, most of them will. If you ask them again, what year you were there, where you were, and so forth, that kind of opens the door and gets a lot of them moving. We've done a lot of interviews with World War II and Korean and Vietnam vets, and it's amazing once you get people started how much they appreciate actually somebody taking interest, because nobody took interest in us when we came home. I worked for a man right after I came home, and we actually bought property together and so forth. And he never knew I was a Vietnam vet because it wasn't something I could discuss a whole lot.
Vietnam had such an effect on everybody. Not being a veteran cost me a teaching job, and being a veteran got me one. The same job, by the way. It was just 2 years in between. But Vietnam has left its mark on this country, and it's left a deep mark. And we're going to smooth it over, talk about it, answer all of your questions. So please give us a call at 919-518-9773. This is the first session of Lessons of Vietnam, and we hope we'll talk a long time, and we'll learn from each other on this trip.
And we will have another subject to talk about a little bit. This is kind of a welcome to the program, so you get introduced to each other. And Bob and I are, well, actually, he's from the north, as you can probably tell, from Pennsylvania. I'm from the south. But the funny thing about it was his mother's name was Pearl, my mother's name was Pearl, and we're born the same day. He wasn't fortunate enough to be born down here in the South in God's country. He was unfortunately it took him a while to find the right place, but we do a lot of stuff together. Bob is head of the education and board. He's actually the director of the Bridgeback Foundation, which is what we use for fundraising and for the things we do in Vietnam, which we'll talk more about the next thing, and also the education. We flew out to Seattle, Washington earlier this year and spoke to the National Social Studies. Social Studies. I tell you, my southern tongue sometimes has this problem. The National Social Studies seminar. We also spoke in Greensboro to the one there, and we've made some good contacts. We just recently were out in Texas talking to about 2,000 students out there about the lessons of Vietnam, and that has gone over so well. We're supposed to go back next November and talk to them again, and it opened a lot of doors out there for them. And one of the things that the course does, it brings in people from the neighborhood. It gives the local schools an opportunity to reach out and touch the public and have the public involved in their school systems. And I think that's one of the valuable things about this Lessons of Vietnam that we travel around the country with. It does get the local veterans and so forth to come in and be involved with the schools. Because a lot of schools, Bob, you go into and ask them, do you know a vet? And they say, well, I take my dog to this vet.
Well, you know what it does, Bill, is the Lessons of Vietnam has introduced the school systems around the country to a whole new asset. See, most schools have never tapped, as I said earlier, the veterans community, the VFWs, the American Legions, other than for sporting events. These men and women that serve their country are the backbone of America. They come in, they do all kinds of things for a school system, and once a school incorporates some ownership and the students learn, there's a whole other adult class they can tap because they see their teachers, their coaches, their parents, of course, and now they're introduced to the veterans community. They come into the school with a lot of pride, a lot of discipline, and they tell their story, and history comes alive. And then it has a face, a personality, and you make friends with these students for life. They ask the best questions. You give them ownership of the class. You see them downtown, you see them months from there, and they always want to serve their country. They want to be a vet. They want to go into the service and do something good for their country, which is very healthy. It's one of the things we strive to do, is have the young people really care about the United States and get patriotism back where it was years ago. And we think we're getting there, but it's a long process. But we are going to stick with it. And part of the course, Lessons of Vietnam, is to have people that didn't serve in Vietnam not feel so guilty. Some of them say, I wish I'd have served in Vietnam. I wish I'd have went. But see, the thing was, it was such a different kind of war. You were caught in the crosshairs. You went, you served, you came home, and you kind of went underground for a while. And now we're back telling the story. It's a good story. It's a very popular story.
We look forward to meeting with you again. Again, if you have any questions or you'd like to have a subject discussed or whatever on the show, give us a call at that magic number, 919-518-9773, or email us a question or comment if you'd like for us to cover anything in particular. This show is dedicated to the men and women who served and also the men and women who are serving today. If you see a man or woman today in a uniform, go up and take them for the service. You just unbelievable just how much it would mean to them. And we, again, thank you for taking your time to give us an opportunity, and we look forward to talking with you again. Bob and I will get together and talk about some of the things that we want to discuss, and we're open to suggestions from y'all. So, again, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.